Okay, let's be real for a second. Managing work, family, kids, it's a lot, right? It's already a juggling act. Now imagine on top of all that, you're dealing with a type 2 diagnosis. You're constantly checking your blood sugar, planning every single meal, remembering medications. It's like a whole other full-time job.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to really dig into today, that mental and emotional side of diabetes that doesn't get enough attention. I think it's so important whether you're personally dealing with it or you know someone who is.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we talk about the physical stuff a lot, right?
Yeah.
The symptoms, the treatments, all that. But that mental and emotional piece, it's
Like,
huge.
huge. Like, one of the things that jumped out at me when we were prepping for this is that people with diabetes are like 2 to 3 times more likely to have depression. And that's
It
that's not just a statistic, right? That's telling us something.
absolutely makes you think, right? You
Yeah.
get that diagnosis, and suddenly it's like this chronic condition that needs so much attention all the time. You're always on. It's no wonder it can feel completely overwhelming.
It really is like another job on top of everything else. And it's not even just the initial shock. It's the day after day, week after week, always thinking about it. That's got to take a toll.
Oh, for sure. It's 24/7. Meals, checking your blood sugar, meds.
Yeah,
It never stops. And that constant mental load, that's a recipe for burnout. Even if you don't have diabetes, a lot of people can relate to that feeling.
totally. It's like you're always on, never really get to switch off. And with diabetes, it's not just mental, right? It's your physical health too. It's all tied together.
And get this, the way your blood sugar goes up and down,
Hmm.
it doesn't just mess with your energy levels, it messes with your brain too. You ever get those days where you're just super irritable or can't think straight?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially if I haven't eaten in a while. Is that the same kind of thing?
Could be. But for someone with diabetes, those blood sugar swings can be way more intense, and that makes it even harder to think clearly, to control your emotions, to focus. Even simple stuff becomes a challenge.
So you're not just stressed about managing it. The diabetes itself makes it harder to handle stress. It's like a vicious cycle. And when we talk long term, what are the risks here? What happens when this stress and diabetes management keep bumping up against each other?
Well, one thing we see a lot is that it increases your chances of developing some serious mental health conditions. We're not just talking about regular stress here.
Okay, so let's break that down. We talked a little about depression, but what about something like anxiety? How does that fit in?
Anxiety is a big one, and it often shows up in ways that are very specific to diabetes. For example, a lot of people get really anxious about hypoglycemia. That's when your blood sugar drops really fast, and it can be pretty scary. Seeing that happens?
Hold on, can we pause there? For anyone listening who might not know, can you explain what happens with hypoglycemia and why it's such a big deal?
Sure thing. So basically, hypoglycemia is where your blood sugar gets too low. And your body needs that sugar, that glucose, for energy. Your brain especially. It can happen for different reasons. Maybe you took too much insulin, or you didn't eat enough, or you worked out really hard without adjusting your food.
Right, right.
So your brain needs that constant fuel, and when it drops suddenly, well, it can cause a bunch of symptoms. You might get confused, shaky, or in really bad cases, you could even have a seizure or pass out.
Wow, okay, yeah. That makes sense why the fear of that would make people anxious, especially with diabetes.
It can be a really powerful fear, and that can actually lead people to avoid things that might trigger it. They might skip meals or not check their blood sugar as often, and that just creates a whole other set of problems.
One fear feeding another fear, and it just keeps going.
Exactly. And on top of anxiety and depression, there's this thing called diabetes distress, which is specific to people with diabetes.
I haven't heard of that. What is diabetes distress exactly?
So it's like this feeling of being overwhelmed by the constant effort of managing diabetes. You might feel frustrated by how demanding it is, or worried about the future, or even guilty if your numbers aren't perfect. It's not exactly the same thing as clinical depression, but it can be just as tough to deal with.
So, if I'm getting this right, we're talking about three big challenges here: depression, anxiety that's tied to managing diabetes, and then this diabetes distress thing. It's a lot to take in, honestly. But and maybe I'm wrong, it feels like things are about to take a more hopeful turn in the stuff we've been looking at. Are we about to hear from people who have dealt with this stuff?
We are. Hearing real stories can really help us connect with these ideas, on a human level. And they give us hope, too. We're going to hear from 3 different people, each with their own story of how they've navigated the emotional side of diabetes. And that's where it starts to get really interesting.
All right, I'm ready to hear these stories. Who's up first?
So first, we've got Sarah. She's 35, got 2 kids, and was diagnosed about 5 years ago. And she's really honest about how, at first, it was just completely overwhelming. Like, how do you balance taking care of yourself with taking care of a family when you have this whole new thing to deal with? The pressure was just getting to her.
I can see that. It's a lot to put on anyone's plate, especially when you're already juggling so much. Did she find ways to manage?
She did. One of the big things for her was realizing she didn't have to go it alone. She started therapy to help sort through everything she was feeling and to come up with some coping mechanisms. And her partner really stepped up to share the load at home. More help with the kids, more help around the house. And that gave her some space to just breathe and focus on herself.
That's huge, right? Having people you can lean on who get what you're going through. But what about the actual diabetes stuff, like the meal planning, the blood sugar checks, all that? How did she handle that part?
Well, she got creative. Instead of seeing those things as just another chore, she found ways to involve her kids. They started doing these meal planning parties every week where everyone got to pick out healthy recipes and learn about different kinds of food. And even checking blood sugar, they turned it into a game. The kids would help her keep track of the numbers and see how she was doing.
That's so smart. Taking something that could feel like a drag and making it fun, making it a family thing, it shows how much a different way of looking at things can help.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm curious about the second story now.
This was about John, and he's a professional athlete. Now, you might think, athlete, diabetes, how does that even work? But his story really shows that it can affect anyone. At the beginning, he got really scared of this thing called exercise-induced hypoglycemia.
I can see that. If you're an athlete, especially at that level, a sudden blood sugar drop could be dangerous, could even mess with your career. How did he deal with that fear?
Well, instead of letting it control him, he went after it head on. He got a coach, a diabetes educator, and really learned how to manage his blood sugar when he was training. He started using this continuous glucose monitor so he could see exactly what was happening in real time, which helped him catch those dips before they got bad.
So knowledge was power for him, and tech too, by the sounds of it.
Exactly. As he understood more about how his body was reacting and figured out the right insulin plan for him, he started to feel more in control. He learned the warning signs, had a plan if his blood sugar started to drop, and was able to get back to competing at a high level.
It's inspiring, right? He took this challenge and used it to learn, to grow, to figure out how to keep doing what he loved. All right, last story. Tell me about this one.
So this is Maria, a retired teacher. When she got diagnosed, she really struggled to keep her blood sugar steady. But the thing that really got to her was this feeling of being all alone. She had always been really social, but diabetes made her feel like she was living in this separate world like nobody understood.
Yeah, that sense of isolation. We've talked about that a bit. It can be a huge obstacle. Did she find a way to connect with people again?
She did, and it's a great example of how much community can help. She decided to join a local diabetes support group, and it was a game changer for her.
I'm guessing it wasn't just about getting practical advice about managing
You
diabetes.
got it. Don't get me wrong, she picked up some great tips from other people in the group, but what she really valued was that feeling of belonging, of knowing that other people got what she was going through. It was a safe space to talk about the struggles, the fears, the good stuff too, without feeling judged.
That's powerful. A reminder that you don't have to go through this alone. As you're telling these stories, I'm noticing a theme here. Are you seeing it too? It's like they all figured out a way to move beyond just keeping their diabetes under control. They found ways to create a life that felt good, that felt joyful, even with all the challenges of diabetes.
Right. It's amazing. Sarah found her way by simplifying things and getting her family on board. John dove into the knowledge and used tech to get that control back so he could keep doing what he loved. And Maria found strength in connecting with other people who understood. Each of them found their own path to feeling better.
And it's so inspiring because it shows you don't have to follow some cookie cutter plan. It's about finding what works for you, for your life.
Yeah, and even though they did things differently, they all kind of made this same mental shift. They stopped seeing diabetes as this burden and started figuring out how to live well with it.
That's a big difference, right? Not ignoring the tough stuff, but deciding to focus on making your life good despite it.
Exactly. And that leads us to what we can all take away from this. We talked about building a support system, friends, family, maybe a support group. We talked about ways to manage stress, mindfulness, meditation, even just taking a few deep breaths. And remember, asking for help from a therapist, a diabetes educator, whoever you need, that's not a weakness, it's smart.
And we talked about how even a little bit of exercise can help, both with your mood and with keeping your blood sugar more stable. And having a good routine for eating, for exercise, for sleep, that can make a difference too.
All these things, they can help you manage diabetes in a way that puts you first, that helps you live a full life.
So as we wrap up today, here's something to think about. How can you use what we've talked about today in your own life? Or maybe to help someone you care about? What can you do to move beyond just focusing on the numbers and really start taking care of your whole self, your well-being?
This is really just the start of the conversation. There's so much information out there, so much support. Don't stop here. Keep learning, keep exploring.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the link between mental health and type 2. It's a big topic, but we hope it's given you some new insights and maybe even inspired you to prioritize your own well-being on this journey. We'll see you next time.